pandemic is not over yet. We may have forgotten about it, but the Wuhan virus has not left us. More than 2 years on, the original hotspot is now reporting the maximum number of cases. I'm talking about China, the birthplace of the virus. The lockdown in the world's biggest hotspot, Shanghai, has been extended. Daily infections have risen to more than 13,000 cases. These are the numbers that we know about. There could be more. This is the official data. The military has been called in for containment in Shanghai. China has deployed its troops. This is the biggest outbreak since Wuhan. And the world knows that. The Chinese press says there's nothing to worry about. The China strategy of zero COVID will prevail in the end. Tonight we'll tell you why it's not working. Zero COVID is failing miserably. The residents of Shanghai are suffering. They're being beaten up by healthcare workers. They're being pushed and shoved into buses and shipped off to quarantine centers. And in quarantine, they're literally fighting for survival. Tonight on Gravitas, we have 5 videos for you. 5 videos that expose the truth about China's zero COVID strategy. It's been a while since we talked about the pandemic. Seems like the world has moved on, and it has, except for one country, the home country of the Wuhan virus. It is the very picture of chaos. China is struggling, and how? I'm going to show you a video, and let me say that it's disturbing. We advise viewer discretion. This video is believed to be from Shanghai, a healthcare worker violently enforcing quarantine orders. Is it a crime to be a COVID patient? In China, it seems it is. China is going through a pandemic nightmare. New cases are being reported. Millions have been put in quarantine. There is food shortage. There is panic buying. There's a lot of suffering. Making all of it worse is the Communist Party. They've imposed draconian measures. Patients are being forced into quarantine. People are dying due to lack of care. Little children are being separated from their families. The public anger is growing, and it's usually difficult to gauge public sentiment on the mainland. People don't speak up in China. When they do, they face a crackdown. We all know that. China does not put up with dissent. And yet, news has a way of coming out sooner or later. Same with the suffering of the Chinese people. Tonight, we will show you 5 videos to sum up how China is punishing its people after failing to control the Wuhan virus. We are going to start with Shanghai, and we'll tell you what's happening there. The world's biggest hotspot right now, that's Shanghai. More than 20 million citizens are under lockdown. Local authorities are struggling. A few days ago, the army was deployed in Shanghai. That's how bad the situation is. The city's healthcare system has collapsed, but China is still sticking to its zero COVID rule. The one that has seen zero success. Zero COVID means mass testing. It also means tough quarantine, and it's not delivering. The virus is still spreading. So what does China do? Zero tolerance. That's their new mantra. Punishing the people for contracting the virus. And I will show you how. This is video number 1. Again, this is believed to be from Shanghai. People are being forced into centralized quarantine facilities. Healthcare workers in PPE kits are picking them up and forcing them into isolation. Once again, we advise viewer discretion. Citizens being shoved into buses like they're criminals. Now, we don't know if they tested positive, but they were being taken to a quarantine facility. To call this inhumane would be an understatement. China was unable to contain the Omicron outbreak, and now the people of Shanghai are paying for the government's failure. Now, in the quarantine centers, the situation is hardly any better. There's chaos. This is video number 2. We received this one earlier today. It is from a quarantine site in Shanghai. People here were fighting for supplies.
看哦，这个抢饭喽，要死人喽！看，哎呦，打起来了，打
What are they fighting for? Basic needs, stuff like blankets, food, even water. Residents of Shanghai have lodged complaints now. And we've accessed one such complaint. This is a woman talking about the same quarantine site that you just saw. Her mother was admitted there. Let me quote from what she said. My mum tested positive and was at home for a week, laying low, and she recovered. Yet they recklessly took her away. When she arrived, she had to snatch a room for herself. Nothing was fixed. People who tested positive and negative all mixed together. There was no hot water, no healthcare workers, no nurses. There was nothing. People had to fight over food and water. The chaos and the confusion was over the limit. Like we told you before, it's a nightmare. And some people are now openly defying rules. This is video number 3. It shows a man walking on the streets of Shanghai. He defied the law. He stepped out without a mask. Now look at what they did to him. The man was hauled into a police vehicle and taken away. He was accused of violating pandemic prevention rules. Taking off the mask may not be the best way to protest, we agree, but the Chinese people say they've had enough. Here is another one. Video number 4. It's of an old man defying lockdown orders. Clearly, people are losing patience. I'll come to our 5th and final video for tonight. It shows a woman shouting and complaining about the restrictions. That's what happens when people lose faith in their government. Defying rules in China can cost you a lot. Yet these people have been pushed to the end of their tether. We hope they can recover safely. And we must say, this is the same China that has repeatedly declared success over its homemade virus. The same China that has been telling the world to follow its playbook. Today, it stands exposed. The Wuhan virus is out of control and the zero COVID strategy is a big flop. So that's what's happening in China. The mood outside, though, is quite different. Forget deploying military to fight the virus or wearing PPE kits. Outside China, the world is walking mask-free. Our world is dialing down COVID precautions. The popular opinion is that the pandemic is over. Not scientific opinion, let me say, but popular opinion. Yes, cases are rising in some pockets. There are still Wuhan virus deaths in some parts of the world. But the overarching theme is that the worst is behind us. So Germany is letting people walk around even if they have the Wuhan virus. Even if you test positive in Germany, you do not have to isolate anymore. In India, you won't be fined for not wearing a mask. British Airways says its passengers don't need to wear masks on board. So does Virgin Atlantic. But what does all of this mean for you? Should you start traveling maskless? Should you go back to living your life free of masks? There is no mandate forcing you to keep that mask on. There is no fine either. But there is fear. Fear of the Wuhan virus, fear of being infected, fear of being hospitalized. Basically, reliving that hellish cycle that we've all been through. That fear is very much there. And a lot of people today are suffering from this peculiar fear. The American Psychological Association is calling this the no mask anxiety. People are uncomfortable going maskless. They may be ditching the mask while driving or while interacting with colleagues at safe and sanitized spaces, but outside their comfort zones, like in malls or at airports, people are scared to take off their mask. This selective masking does not have any scientific basis, but there's nothing that people can fall back on either. All we have are mixed signals from countries and corporates. Is it safe to go maskless or is it not? There are no clear answers, no consensus between countries, between friends and families. They're making judgments based on WhatsApp forwards, based on what they're hearing at gatherings. So COVID precaution has become a classic case of to each his own. And such information void rather, can be very dangerous, especially when dealing with the deadly virus. So we decided to clear the air. We decided to give you answers that are credible and that you can rely on. As the world dials down COVID precautions, should you too? Should you keep that mask on or let it go? We asked this question to experts, a lot of them across the world, and they gave us some great news. They said the mask can be put down for now. Doctors believe our world right now is in great shape. People are being vaccinated. People have acquired natural immunity. One doctor said, and I'm quoting, there is nothing to worry about. So what about Omicron? I'm sure some of you have this question in your mind right now. Well, I did too. So I asked the doctor, and he said that Omicron is quote-unquote an amazing virus. Why is that? One, despite being highly infectious, Omicron has extremely low mortality. Two, Omicron is highly immunogenic, meaning it stimulates your immune system, it helps you and your body fight the virus. And three, Omicron has somehow wiped out all other variants, meaning for now, as we speak, there is just one dominant variant that the world is dealing with. And that variant is Omicron, a variant we do not really have to worry about. So for now, we are good. Now back to the question, should you put that mask down? Well, for most of you, the answer is yes. Experts say everybody does not need to mask up at the moment. The elderly or the ones with comorbidities should be a bit more careful and they should keep the mask on. One expert also pointed out that when it comes to selective masking, wearing a mask in closed spaces is more important than wearing it outside. All in all, while masks have proven to restrict Wuhan virus infection, currently it is a matter of personal choice. Next question. Should you also dial down on other COVID precautions like social distancing? Well, doctors say for now you can. My interaction with experts made me realize one thing, that most of us are convinced that there is nothing we can do to prevent another wave. Not until the whole world is vaccinated, but until that deadlier variant emerges. We should be able to go about our lives almost like pre-pandemic times. There are exceptions, however, for those who are immunocompromised, and I keep repeating that because it's important. Next question, can the rest of you board that flight without a mask? Can you resume travel, dine out, resume visits to gyms and malls without a mask? The answer, I'm told, is yes. Again, for now, the world outside is safe. If and when another wave comes, you will have to go back to staying indoors. You'll have to go back to masking. Until then, you should be fine. All in all, it's good news. While COVID is not out of our lives, the pandemic is not over yet. It is true that for now, the worst may be over. For now, most of you can go out mask-free. I wish I could say this for those of you watching us from China too. But the Communist Party makes its own rules, and they don't seem terribly fond of science or logic. So good luck. For now, we are turning to Pakistan, where the crisis persists and the drama continues. A breakthrough was expected today. The Supreme Court was going to give a verdict. It was going to decide whether Pakistan should go to polls. But the matter has been adjourned yet again. So the country is back to where it was, in the grip of political uncertainty. And amid this meltdown, the role of the Pakistan army is becoming more and more prominent. It is now amply clear that the army is indeed the puppeteer of this chaos. If there was any doubt about this, the Army Chief General Bajwa cleared all of them. He spoke at the Pakistan National Security Council on Saturday. We told you about this yesterday too. He wanted closer ties with the US and he condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And this is the opposite of what Imran Khan wanted, what he's been saying. He wanted Pakistan to have an independent foreign policy just like India. Well, the army did not. And in Pakistan, the army decides foreign policy. How does that work? The answer to that question lies in history. 1947, the partition of India, the inception of Pakistan, it divided not just the people but also the army, the British Indian Army. Back then, 3/4 of the army had officers from Punjab and the Northwest Frontier Province. Half of all senior officers came from Punjab. In other words, the army was cohesive and narrowly recruited. After partition, India fixed the ethnic imbalance. Pakistan fostered it, so much so that today nearly 90% of the officers in the Pakistan army are from Punjab and the Northwest Frontier provinces. Their army became more centralized, a close-knit institution of generals from the same background, the same ethnicity and the same tribes. They believed in a quote-unquote martial race, a race they thought was superior from the rest of the Pakistanis. And these generals refused to be subservient to the civilian government. Plus, there were strategic compulsions that made the army powerful. A Cold War was on by the time Pakistan was formed. The US and the UK backed the Pakistan army. They gave them weapons to counter Soviet influence. Interestingly, Pakistan Army's first commander-in-chief was a British officer, General Sir Frank Walter Messervy. He served as the army chief till 1951. Even Pakistan's intelligence agency, the notorious ISI, was a brainchild of the British. It was formed by Major General Sir Robert Cotham, a British officer who at that time was serving as the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Pakistan Army. Now, this geostrategic arrangement served the West in several ways. All espionage of the Soviets was done from Pakistan. The relationship with China was built on Pakistani basis. The Russian invasion of Afghanistan was defeated with Pakistan's help. Even America's war on terror was launched through Pakistan. In other words, the Pakistan army over the decades has always been a stooge of the Western world. It's been their most important security cog in South Asia. Domestically, this has caused a lot of trouble for the civilian leadership. The generals became more powerful. They began controlling the system. They began dictating policy in security, defense, and external affairs. And every time a civilian leader challenged their control, the army staged a coup. We have multiple examples. 1958, Pakistan's Prime Minister Sir Feroz Khan Noon was deposed, overthrown in a coup by Army Chief General Ayub Khan. Why? Because he tried to bring constitutional changes in Pakistan and curtail the army's powers. 1977, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was deposed in another coup. This one was led by General Zia-ul Haq. Same reason, Bhutto's interference in the military's affairs. He had removed 2 military chiefs after Pakistan's loss in the 1971 war. The army took revenge 6 years later. 1997, Nawaz Sharif repeated the same mistake. He relieved General Jahangir Karamat from the chairmanship of Joint Chiefs. 1 year later, General Pervez Musharraf repaid the insult by toppling Nawaz Sharif from power. Around the same time, Imran Khan, who had just entered politics, was also slamming the army. He blamed the generals for ruining democracy in Pakistan. I must play out this for you. Listen to what he said back then.
बॉर्डर वाकई डीपोलिटिसाइज हो गया. एक इसकी बहुत बड़ी वजह पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज ने मायूस किया. दूसरी उसकी बहुत बड़ी वजह पाकिस्तान की फौज है. बार बार जब जनरल्स पावर में आते हैं तो वो भी एक वोटर को इसलिए मायूस कर देते हैं कि जनरल्स फिर नेचुरल लीडरशिप नहीं आने देते. वो फिर अपने पुत्रों को सामने लेके आते हैं. नेचुरल लीडरशिप से क्या मराद है? नेचुरल लीडरशिप तो लोग ऊपर लेके आते हैं ना, जो लोगों का नेचुरल लीडर है. फौज एक मैन्युफैक्चर करती है लीडरशिप. जान के लेके उस इंसान को आते हैं जिसको वो कंट्रोल कर सकते हैं. अब कंट्रोल किसको कर सकते हैं? या वो करप्ट होता है या उसके करप्शन की फाइल होगी, उसको कंट्रोल करेंगे, और या फिर एक नाहला आदमी होगा जिसकी कोई स्टैंडिंग ही नहीं होगी.
20 years later, the same Imran Khan came to power thanks to the army. He sang their praises. He defended their actions against previous regimes. He was playing the pliable prime minister all along. In 2019, an Economist report said this. They said the military will continue to shape Pakistan's security and foreign policy, and that the Imran Khan government would be largely amenable to this agreement. And this report was based on intelligence and inputs from US security officials. Clearly, the assessments were wrong. Imran Khan challenged the army and the army retaliated. Only this time, it did not stage a coup. The army has grown smarter. It is playing the opposition in what's being called a sophisticated soft coup. So Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the voter has become depoliticized, and the biggest reason for their frustration is, of course, the way things have played out in Pakistan over the past few years. The economic crisis is said to be one of the reasons why Imran Khan's position has become untenable, and that has played into the army's hands. And talking about the economic crisis, let's look at what's happening in another country in the neighborhood, Sri Lanka. It is in disarray. The Rajapaksas are losing control, and the streets of Sri Lanka are looking like a war zone. Take a look at this. What you saw were images from yesterday. A massive crowd gathered at Mahinda Rajapaksa's private residence. They were greeted with water cannons and tear gas. The crackdown did not deter the protesters. They're still on the streets and they're demanding the resignation of the brothers, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. Yesterday they seemed in control. Their entire cabinet, all 26 members, had resigned, presumably on the instructions of the brothers. That's how the world saw it. The Rajapaksa stayed on. The rest of the ministers had resigned. They rejigged a few ministries. They reached out to the opposition. They pitched a unity government, of course, with the Rajapaksas at the helm. That was the offer that they made. And they came to power with brute majority in the last election, remember. Their party has 2/3 of seats in the parliament. In 24 hours, the tables have turned. The lawmakers are leaving the Rajapaksas in droves. The first setback came in the form of a resignation from this man, Ali Sabri. Yesterday, he was made the finance minister of Sri Lanka, handpicked by the Rajapaksas, promoted from the justice ministry to the finance ministry. 24 hours after taking oath, he has quit. You heard that right. Sri Lanka's new finance minister has quit within 24 hours. We've accessed a copy of his resignation. Apparently, he never wanted the post in the first place. And can you really blame him? Sri Lanka is battling its worst ever economic crisis. Who would want to be finance minister at a time like this? But I'll read from the resignation letter nonetheless. This is what he said. If Your Excellency wishes to appoint a person suitable to handle the situation from outside the current parliament, I am willing to step down from my parliamentary seat to enable Your Excellency to make such an appointment. The letter was addressed to the President. So like I said, Sri Lanka is going through its worst economic crisis. The finance minister has resigned. In fact, Ali Sabri's resignation was just the beginning. Setback number 2. At least 41 lawmakers have withdrawn their support to the Rajapaksas. 41. They have walked out of the government. Have they joined the opposition is the question. Well, not exactly. These 41 lawmakers say that they want to represent themselves independently. And this has serious implications for the Rajapaksas. The Sri Lankan parliament, let me tell you, has 225 seats. The magic number, as they call it, the majority mark, is 113. The Rajapaksas had a clear majority before, 150 seats. The opposition had 75. Now, 41 lawmakers have left the government, which means the Rajapaksas have just 109 MPs. That's 4 less than the majority mark. The independent lawmakers can vote either way. Long story short, the Rajapaksa brothers now lead a minority government. The Sri Lankan parliament met today, and that's where these 41 lawmakers announced their decision to become independents. So what next for the Rajapaksas? Will they lose power? Well, they could. Will there be a trust vote? There could be. There's a lot of buzz in Colombo right now. Sri Lankan media is reporting this. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa apparently spoke to some senior members of his party, and he ruled out his resignation, but his brother, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa's position could be threatened. And I'll tell you why. In Sri Lanka, the people elect the president directly. And in turn, the president elects the prime minister. Whoever is chosen must command the confidence of the parliament. In other words, the prime minister will be chosen by the president, but the prime minister must also have majority support of the lawmakers. Now, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa does not have that anymore. He does not have that majority support. He's leading a minority government. So the opposition could potentially bring a resolution. They could defeat Mahinda Rajapaksa in the no trust vote. They could force his brother, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, to pick a new prime minister. And that's a possibility that has crossed their mind. It seems Gotabaya Rajapaksa has discussed this with some senior lawmakers. He is said to have told them that he will hand over the government to anyone who can come up with a simple majority. The opposition also has a second option. Dissolve the parliament, call for a snap election. Will they do that, though? At a time when people are going hungry, at a time when the country is out of essential supplies, from drugs to food items, they're running out of everything, when hospitals are on the verge of shutting down, when there is no fuel, and Sri Lanka is begging its neighbours for credit lines, will the focus shift to a power struggle? Will there be a new election? It's hard to say. What's clear beyond doubt is the fact that the position of the Rajapaksa brothers is becoming more untenable by the day. So you've seen the problem. You've seen the people who created this problem. Now let's talk about the solution. How can Sri Lanka escape this mess? The obvious answer is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Sri Lanka could negotiate a bailout package with them. How would that work? A bailout package is basically a loan We're talking about billions of dollars here. The IMF can disburse this loan to the Sri Lankan government. It can top up the reserves. It can avoid a default. And everybody goes home happy. Well, not so fast. Reaching out to the IMF is a very complicated process. It's a 50-50 call. Some bailouts are successful, like India and Kenya, or Mexico in the 1980s. Others are not so much. Just think back to the Grexit fiasco in the mid-2010s. The fact is, the IMF is a double-edged sword. Yes, they bail you out, but they also set strict conditions. You must cut down subsidies. You must raise interest rates, track down wasteful spending. Basically, there's a lot more scrutiny once the IMF puts money into a country. So naturally, the Rajapaksas are not keen on that option. They don't want scrutiny. They run Sri Lanka like a family business. Oversight is not their strong suit. So they preferred bilateral packages, $2.5 billion from China, another $2.5 billion from India, $150 million from Bangladesh. These loans help in the short run. But they're like band-aids on a bullet wound. Ultimately, you need a major surgery. And that major surgery is the IMF bailout. It wouldn't be a first for Colombo, though. In the last 56 years, they have sought an IMF bailout some 16 times. Only one country is ahead on that list, and that country is Pakistan. They have sought more IMF bailouts than Sri Lanka. And that's not a proud list to be on. Even the Rajapaksas have seen the writing on the wall. The Chinese are not eager to help them. There are limits to what India can do. So IMF is clearly the way to go, which brings us to the logistics. How can Sri Lanka get an IMF bailout? For starters, they need a finance minister. They don't have one. Until this weekend, Basil Rajapaksa held that position. That's the president's younger brother. Last month, he held talks with the IMF's Asia-Pacific officials. This month, he was supposed to fly to Washington to officially begin the bailout talks. But that's not happening. So right now, Sri Lanka needs a good finance minister, someone who understands the crisis, someone who can get them a good IMF deal. But that is only half the job done. Sri Lanka's total external debt is $45 billion. A bailout alone cannot make that disappear. It's a very big sum of money. But here's what it can do. It can open up more avenues, bring in more foreign investment, resume tourism, basically kickstart the Lankan economy. The IMF has already chalked out the basics. Let me tell you what the latest report says. Based on staff analysis, the fiscal consolidation necessary to bring down debt levels to safe levels would require excessive adjustment over the coming years, pointing to a clear solvency problem. Fiscal consolidation, let me translate that for you. More taxes, large spending cuts, fewer subsidies and higher interest rates. That is the gist of the IMF's plan for Sri Lanka. In the short run, that is a lot of pain. Ordinary Sri Lankans will feel the pinch. But the IMF is not looking at the short run. They're looking at restructuring the Lankan economy. And that takes two things, time and patience, which brings us to the Sri Lankan leadership. Do they have the patience? In the past, they've not shown much. We told you that Sri Lanka has sought IMF relief 16 times. Each time, the IMF set strict conditions. Guess how many deals Sri Lanka actually fulfilled? Just 9. The rest of them were abandoned midway. The latest was in 2020. Gotabaya Rajapaksa decided to ditch the IMF program. Instead, he charted his own policy. More loans from China, poor tax cuts, and bizarre pet projects. I have an example. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was obsessed with organic agriculture. He banned all chemical fertilizers, all kinds of synthetic pesticides, and he decided that all Lankan agriculture will be organic. Guess what happened next? Crops failed all over Sri Lanka. The government had to compensate farmers with $200 million. Plus, they lost valuable foreign exchange. Take tea, for instance. Normally, Sri Lanka earns $1 billion by exporting tea. It's a flagship product. After Gotabaya's little experiment, that changed. Tea exports fell by $425 million. And this is Sri Lanka's real problem. The leaders keep getting richer. They keep coming up with weird policies, and in the end, it's the people who suffer. So coming back to my first question, how can Sri Lanka escape this mess? In the short run, by getting an IMF bailout. In the long run, with meaningful reforms. You cannot run a 21st century economy with tea, rubber and tourism. You need resilient industries. The question is, who will implement these reforms? The family that created this mess? or a fresh crop of realistic and selfless leaders? Well, that's a question for the Lankans to decide. For now, we'll head to the United States. You might remember Hunter Biden, the scandalous son of Joe Biden. Well, he's back in the news, and this time for living a luxurious life, apparently at the expense of American taxpayers. Hunter Biden has rented a $20,000 mansion in California. And this is right next to the U.S. Secret Service, renting another mansion worth $30,000. Why would the Secret Service need that? To provide round-the-clock security to the president's son. And this story is going viral. American citizens are outraged. They're accusing the Biden administration of wasting public money. Here's a report.
Joe Biden is our dad. We want to tell you what kind of president our dad will be.
Meet Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's 52-year-old son, often described as Biden's soft spot. Also his Achilles heel. Courtesy, his never-ending scandals. From being thrown out of the U.S. Navy for cocaine abuse, to having an illegitimate child with a stripper, to having an affair with his dead brother's widow. Hunter's life has always been the fodder for American tabloids, and he keeps giving them more. Ever since his father became president, Hunter has been living a life of luxury. Look at these images. They're from Malibu, California, a city famous for its beaches and rave parties. Hunter has rented a palatial mansion here, a property worth $20,000 a month. It has 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, vaulted high ceilings, spacious yards, a pool, a spa, even a chef's kitchen. Now, first of all, there's no clarity on whether Hunter is paying for this himself or if he's using his father's money to foot the bill. What's worse is the presence of U.S. Secret Service officials here. This is Hunter's pad. Right next to it is a Secret Service base, another plush mansion worth $30,000 a month. Yes, the Biden administration is spending such obscene amounts of money to keep around-the-clock watch on the president's son. This is happening at the American taxpayers' cost. The Secret Service uses public money to protect the first family. This revelation comes at a time when a federal probe into Hunter Biden's tax affairs has intensified. An increasing number of witnesses are appearing before a jury in Delaware. They're giving testimonies about the payments Biden Jr. received while serving on the board of directors of a Ukrainian natural gas company in the run-up to the 2020 U.S. elections. The Democrats, along with the American media, called the accusations a mere conspiracy theory. Now that Biden is in the White House and Hunter hasn't mended his ways, the same media houses are reporting on his shenanigans without any mercy. Life seems to have come full circle for Joe Biden's son.
Hunter Biden is just one problem. These days, the White House has a long list of headaches. Ukraine, Iran, North Korea, basically it's firefighting season. So tonight, we are talking about Joe Biden's lead firefighter, White House Press Secretary Jenssaki. You've probably seen her on this show. Sometimes she's commenting on Putin, sometimes on domestic politics. It's a busy job. Perhaps that's why Jenssaki is looking for a career change. Reports say she's leaving the White House. She's been offered a job at MSNBC, an American news channel. Apparently, she will host a show on their streaming platform. Now, none of this is confirmed. Saki herself says nothing has been finalized yet. Listen in.
Can't get rid of me yet, Ed. I have nothing to confirm about my length of public service or planned service or anything about consideration about next plans. I'm very happy to be standing with all of you here today after it felt like a never-ending, endless time in my basement, quarantining away from my family. Believe it or not, I missed you all a lot. And my focus every day continues to be speaking on behalf of the president.
Very diplomatic indeed. But you know how these things work. Jenssaki may not have confirmed it, but she's definitely moving on from the White House. Maybe she wants a change of scene, or maybe the pressure was too much. Either way, we're not concerned with the reason. We're concerned with the process. A White House press secretary is not just a spokesperson. She has access to all kinds of information. She's present at important meetings. She has the ear of the president and the vice president. Simply put, it's not a media job. It's a political job. How then can you go back to being a journalist? Last I checked, journalists are neutral. They don't support any political party, neither do they openly endorse leaders. Jenssaki has done both. So how can she go back to being a journalist? And by the way, it's not just this press secretary. I must say, US presidents prefer journalists to speak for them. Take a look at this list. Stephen Early, press secretary for Franklin Roosevelt, also correspondent for Associated Press. Charlie Ross, press secretary for Harry Truman, also a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. James Haggerty, Eisenhower's press secretary and a New York Times reporter to boot. George Stephanopoulos, Bill Clinton's communications director, now anchor at ABC News. Kayleigh McEnany, Donald Trump's press secretary, and before that, a Fox News producer. Jenssaki herself has an interesting career. First, she worked for Barack Obama. Then she shifted to CNN. When Joe Biden came to power, she joined the White House, and now she's planning to leave again. Sounds like a flexible world, doesn't it? And I get that there is an established precedent in the US. Journalists do end up as press secretaries. I can also see why it works. They've spent years in front of the camera. So why not keep doing it for the White House? But that's where we have a problem. This is a classic case of conflict of interest. Just think about it. Right now, Jenssaki is negotiating with MSNBC. Her wages, her contract, her time slots. At the same time, she has access to sensitive information, like who is Joe Biden speaking to? What is the president planning to do in Ukraine? Is he preparing more sanctions? And don't get me wrong, we're not questioning Jenssaki's integrity. We're questioning the system. In most countries, this would not work. Journalists can become politicians, but they cannot revert to being journalists. In America, though, anything goes. Climate deniers head environmental agencies. Warmongers can become national security advisors. Journalists can become press secretaries and vice versa. You can imagine what Jenssaki's show will look like. A lot of Democratic talking points, a lot of Joe Biden's policies, and a lot of insider information, but that is not journalism, that's a campaign strategy. The fact is, journalism and politics are two very different jobs, and they must be separated, and that separation must be respected. You cannot oscillate based on whims. Journalist on Mondays, politician on Wednesdays, that is not acceptable. One job requires utmost loyalty to a political cause. The other requires you to question everything. Mixing them both is a clear conflict of interest. And now to the story that the world does not seem to be getting enough of. Elon Musk, he has become Twitter's biggest shareholder. A lot has happened in the last 24 hours. First, the news broke of Musk picking up a 9.2% stake in Twitter. Then Elon Musk started a poll. He asked his followers whether they wanted an edit button on Twitter. Next, Twitter's CEO issued a warning, Parag Agrawal. He also announced that Musk will be joining the board at Twitter. Here's a report.
Risk taker, out of the box, unpredictable. Elon Musk is all of the above. The man never fails to surprise. Here's proof. Elon Musk has picked up 9.2% stake in Twitter. Musk bought shares worth almost $3 billion. That's more than the GDP of Bhutan, Lesotho, Seychelles or Grenada and St. Kitts combined. For Musk, $3 billion isn't much. He's after all the world's richest man. For your information, Elon Musk is worth $289 billion. He can afford to hoard shares. His shopping, however, has consequences. For starters, bagging a 9.2% stake at Twitter makes Musk the platform's biggest shareholder. His holding is more than 4 times that of Jack Dorsey. That's the man who co-founded Twitter. Bagging a 9.2% stake in Twitter also makes Musk a part of Twitter's decision-making body. The SpaceX CEO loves calling names and the shots. That's the pedo tweet, and this his latest. Do you want an edit button? Musk asks. 2 cleverly misspelled options, YSC and ON. Twitter CEO Parag Agrawal retweeted the poll. The consequences will be important. Please vote carefully. What did he mean? Check Agrawal's next tweet. I'm excited to share that we are appointing Elon Musk to our board. And here is Musk's reply. Looking forward to working with Parag and Twitter board to make significant improvements to Twitter in coming months. So that's the story so far. Musk's fans are related. But being spotted jumping in Cloud9 are those with Twitter's shares. The announcement sent Twitter stocks up 27%. The company recorded its biggest one-day gain on the 4th of April, the day the news broke. Here's a question. All the stocks in the world, why did Musk decide on Twitter? There is no doubt Musk is a prolific Twitter user. He has some 80 million followers. Musk loves the attention he gets on Twitter. He once asked his Twitter followers if he should sell 10% of his Tesla stocks. The next thing you know, Tesla shares had crashed. Musk also makes important announcements on Twitter. Not too long ago, Musk announced that he is considering building a new social media platform. Fast forward to April 2022, and Elon Musk is sitting on the board of Twitter. Who would have seen this coming? We did not, and we have no qualms in admitting that. Some say this is all a part of an exhaustive April Fool's prank. Why? Because it began on the 1st of April. Twitter announced it is working on an edit button. Is it an April Fool's joke? Asked one news agency. Well, we do not play pranks. You can trust us to keep you posted on the direction this story follows. For now, tell us what you think. Will the edit button be Musk's foray into the Twitter board? YSC or no? Do let us know.
The opinion polls in France are throwing up a surprise. Marine Le Pen is now surging ahead. Everyone uses one adjective to describe her, and that's far right. And frankly, it fits. Le Pen is anti-immigration. She dabbles in Islamophobia. She's tough on abortion, and she opposes LGBTQ rights. This is Le Pen's third run for presidency. In 2012, she finished third. In 2017, she finished second. So this time, she's creating a lot of buzz. In fact, the new opinion polls have unsettled her opponents. Here's what the latest one shows. Emmanuel Macron is at 53%, Marine Le Pen at 47%. And this is the narrowest margin yet. In 2017, Macron led with 66% of the popular vote. Le Pen was a distant second. This time around, it's a lot closer. The French stock markets are clearly not happy about it. Major indices dropped 1.3%. Banks like BNP Paribas were the worst hit. Investors feel a Le Pen presidency is bad news. And why is that? Because she favors a higher retirement age. She also plans to nationalize highway operators. But more than policies, it's the unpredictability that's bothering them. Marine Le Pen is a disruptor, and stock markets hate disruptors. So why is she polling so well? How is she closing the gap on Emmanuel Macron? Because of three reasons. Reason number one, Marine Le Pen has tried to temper her public image. She dismissed anti-Semites from her party. She toned down her rhetoric on LGBTQ rights and abortion, sort of like a PR makeover. Now, just to be clear, Marine Le Pen is still a far-right demagogue. She's not changing her policies, she's changing the perception of her policies.
The circumstances do not allow us to implement cooperation to fight Islamic fundamentalism with Russia as we speak. It is obvious. But here I am, always trying to take a reasonable stance, as reasonable as possible, but mostly to take France's interest into account.
So that's a big pitch. Reasonable but far right. Marine Le Pen is also helped by some of her rivals, especially this one, Eric Zemmour. If you think Le Pen is problematic, Zemmour is worse. He is a Holocaust denier in a country that was conquered by Nazi Germany. Long story short, Zemmour makes Le Pen look acceptable. Reason number two, the far right is not a pariah anymore. It is a mainstream ideology in today's France. How did that happen? Because the far right cashed in on the anti-immigration sentiment. France for the French. That is Marine Le Pen's rallying call. She wants to prioritize native French people over jobs and welfare schemes. Plus, a burqa ban in public. That's what she calls for. She convinced the French people that immigration threatens their identity. Compare that to Germany. They too welcomed thousands of refugees in the last decade, but Germans elected a centre-left chancellor in 2021. So what did Germany do different? They integrated the refugees into their society. That's something that France could never do. Which brings us to reason number 3, the Macron presidency. For all his grand ambitions, what exactly did Emmanuel Macron achieve? Under his leadership, France became more divided. Under him, we saw the massive Yellow Vest protests. You see, Macron's election was a bit of an aberration in France. Usually the French go two ways, left or right. Centrists have traditionally been ignored. Macron came with a new agenda. Neither left nor right, he said. In 2017, it was a great campaign idea. He swept the election with 66% of the votes. But 5 years on, centrism is losing its sheen. And that is a big worry for Macron. A lot of French voters, especially the youth, are not planning to vote. They are disenchanted with the entire system.
Le souffle du nouvel espoir de Macron il y a 5 ans.
After the breath of new hope from Macron 5 years ago, we now have people who are much more basic in terms of politics, who are of a relatively advanced stage, which is expected of politicians who enter the presidential election. On top of that, Macron, who is, it seems to be once again the youngest, but who was really disappointing during his mandate. So the spark of hope we had 5 years ago has disappeared.
Vachement déçu durant son mandat. Du coup,
the rise of Le Pen is not a coincidence. It is part of a consistent and well-thought-out plan, what she calls de-demonization of the far right. It may not work in 2022. Chances are Macron will still end up winning, but the trend will certainly worry the centrists and the leftists. Far right is not a French untouchable anymore. It is acceptable and surging. With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.